avenue of continuing to learn after retirement is huge. And it sounds like, Dr. Shaker, you took that on as your as a passion, and you certainly, shared that passion for education and for lifelong learning with a community. And who knows who you've inspired through that. But what Dr. Shaker is probably best known for is his 50 plus years, and I got those numbers from him a few moments ago, involvement with music, particularly as a bandmaster. He's been president of the Nebraska State Bandmasters Association. He's president of their past President's Council. He's been president of the Nebraska Music Educator Association. He has served as Nebraska State Chair and coordinator and host for North Central Division professional conferences for bandmasters. He shared with me when he first got to Nebraska State, they had 25 band members. When he left, they had 125. They had just a few majors. They had over 300 music majors. And, as an educator and as somebody from early childhood, music makes a big difference in our lives. And music education isn't just about music. Certainly we want children introduced to music, but music is is a language of its own. And when you learn music, it does create some pathways in our brain that helps in other areas, particularly mathematics and such. And we are just very excited about hearing from Dr. Shaker tonight. He's got a renowned career in education, retired as the department chair for music at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. But I tell you, someone who leaves retirement and continues to work to help others learn has a place in my heart. And we're just really pleased that you took your time and put together this fabulous presentation for us tonight. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and I'm going to get your PowerPoint up and going.
Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is open the door because my dog is crying outside.
Okay.
And I turned the volume up on my computer, and I could hear the embedded videos just fine.
Okay, great. So that's a good for us to go ahead and do that. And all right, Dr. Shaker.
Okay. Well, how I got started on this project, if you want to go, Leanna, and go ahead and next slide. There we go. Back about 2000, I got a call from my son. I have two sons. They both are musicians, but they work in technology. Anyway, the phone call was this way. He's a vice president in charge of cybersecurity for a bank holding company in Iowa. And he called me one day and he said, "Dad, I had a real problem yesterday, and I went to bed with the problem not solved. And when I got up, I was in the shower, and suddenly the solution to the problem was there." And he said, "Do you know anything about this?" And I said, "Well, I know one thing about it, and that is that in my lifetime, I've done that so many times. I went to bed with a problem, and I woke up in the morning, and it was solved. And it had nothing to do with the shower." So, next slide. So I thought it would be good to have a noted neuroscientist talk about the brain. So we'll start with that. And turn up your sound. This is brief.
Well, the Cots and the Tempertones merc the gluposes and overclock the merger chooses. There's to be discussable and part of adjudicator together to mood celebrity and apedity. So fourth frame shows data vision and auditory slow perfection. Resulting friction induces corresponding blip mortalizers, but that all comes under Kroner's electropyramidal saltification, which you will underline in our professor course. Now, horizontally friction and multicentric compulators superless the alleviating Dutch intermediary lubble Dutch, making contace and together to slib temperance and expendency. A reflection inertia corresponds to Hugo-Bavert's supercredited valence multiplication equation, E equals 2R. I'll say that again, E equals 2R, where R is the radiance of a home measure of the voluntary factor. Now, pavionary stems are parabolic and paraceltic, and reflector lucidity overleases the homovesuary and heteroval effect, so that neglectance of Mermat's atmospheric supercontraction causes structure mention of faction cavity there. So don't eat them.
And that scientist is John Cleese. So anyway, I'm not going to read the all of the information here, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about what happened. So this research was done in the 1950s, and when this scientist came in after having lunch, he was eating an ice cream cone. And suddenly the monkey just started reacting. Well, he had these monkeys wired with electrodes, and he noticed that the electrodes were going off really strongly. So anyway, the next time he came in with a banana and the same thing happened. And so he noted it and he was ridiculed for it. Next one. So this researcher talked about mirror neurons, was what he called it. And so he also had animals wired. Next one. And one of the things he observed was that when the animals, namely rabbits, would get scared, they exhibit a thumping movement, and it was called, he called it theta rhythm. And this was also done in the 1950s. Next one. A stranger result followed that, and that involved rats. Next one. Oh, I'm sorry. This researcher was Winston, and he called it theta rhythm. And what he noticed was that when the rabbits were dreaming, they had the electrodes on them still, and it was the same pattern that they exhibited when they were frightened and awake. Now the next one. So this was an amazing discovery involving rats. And what they did is they put the rats in a maze, and then they followed them. Next one. And so when they were dreaming that night, they also had electrodes on their brain as well. When they were dreaming at night, the same reaction was observed in the electrodes. And the next morning, when they got up and they were fed their breakfast, the rats ran right directly to the through the maze to the food. And so that's is what we all have. We all have REM sleep. And what happens when we sleep is that our brain processes everything we did that day. And it sorts out what needs to be kept and what needs to be let go. And so that's the solution. When we sleep, next slide. When we sleep, the problem is solved by our brain. And we don't do anything in the shower. So that's what started me on this frontier. And this was about over 20 years ago, I started working on this. And I've done presentations all over the world and to many professional conferences too. Next one. So I'm going to depart a little bit about this. Do all of you know about the 10,000-hour rule? Well, in a nutshell, what this researcher, Anders Ericsson, and he's at Florida State University now, he studied Van Cliburn and pianists. And what he discovered was that every musician who performed at the highest level of their profession, by the time they were out of high school, they had practiced over 10,000 hours. And the other thing that he discovered about these musicians was they were no smarter than the average bear. They had the average IQ of most college students. And he also learned that he observed that they were involved in focused practice, not just rote practice. And so, next slide. So, all the winners of those competitions had accomplished practice of over 10,000 hours, and many of them were far superior to that. And that's the 10,000-hour rule. So, next slide. The thing that happens with these musicians is that they have routine, focused, organized, creative, and thoughtful practice. That, in other words, they just don't go through the motions. They engage their brain in it as well. And so practice is an integral part of the learning process. Next one. So here's the amazing thing about this. He and other researchers have studied this rule, and there are no objections to it, no exceptions to it. If you want to be, next slide, please. If you want to be the top of your game, that's what it takes. So this is an interesting study that was done. This involved babies in the womb. The researcher solicited some volunteers to do this. And what they did was the expectant mothers in the last trimester of their pregnancy were asked to play the same type of music in the bedroom when the baby was sleeping and when they were awake in the womb. after 1 year after they were born, they brought all these babies back. And what they did is they set up a study that involved two speakers. On one speaker was the music they had listened to in the womb, and on other speaker was similar music, but not the same. And they had lights put up on the speakers. And what they did is the one speaker had the one kind of music on it, the other speaker had the other kind of music on it. And over the time that the babies were, and they were 1 year old, they were not speaking at the time, they gravitated to the speaker that they had listened to music while they were in the womb. 1 year after that. Next one. And this is one of my favorite studies. What they did in this study is they elicited volunteers, and they were paid to do this study. Half of them were to get 2 piano lessons a week, and they were asked to practice for 1 hour each day. The control group did nothing. And so at the end of the 10-month study, two things happened. Oh, by the way, they put these subjects into an MRI or a PET scan. I don't remember what it was, and they listened to music of all kinds, and they videoed the results of them doing that. And so basically what they saw from all the subjects was they were processing the music on the one side of the brain. And so at the end of the 10 months, they put the musicians back in the PET scan and played music for them again, and their entire brain was lit up after 10 months of study, and they had no background in music prior to that time. So literally they were listening to music from an entirely different perspective after 10 months. Okay, now this one is kind of funny, but it talks about how instrumental musicians benefit from the brain. So go ahead.
Did you know that every time musicians pick up their instruments, there are fireworks going off all over their brain? On the outside, they may look calm and focused, reading the music and making the precise and practiced movements required. But inside their brains, there's a party going on. How do we know this? Well, in the last few decades, neuroscientists have made enormous breakthroughs in understanding how our brains work by monitoring them in real time with instruments like fMRI and PET scanners. When people are hooked up to these machines, tasks such as reading or doing math problems each have corresponding areas of the brain where activity can be observed. But when researchers got the participants to listen to music, they saw fireworks. Multiple areas of their brains were lighting up at once as they processed the sound, took it apart to understand elements like melody and rhythm, and then put it all back together into unified musical experience. And our brains do all this work in the split second between when we first hear the music and when our foot starts to tap along. But when scientists turn from observing the brains of music listeners to those of musicians, the little backyard fireworks became a jubilee. It turns out that while listening to music engages the brain in some pretty interesting activities, playing music is the brain's equivalent of a full body workout. The neuroscientists saw multiple areas of the brain light up, simultaneously processing different information in intricate, interrelated, and astonishingly fast sequences. But what is it about making music that sets the brain alight? The research is still fairly new, but neuroscientists have a pretty good idea. Playing a musical instrument engages practically every area of the brain at once, especially the visual, auditory, and motor cortices. And as with any other workout, disciplined, structured practice in playing music strengthens those brain functions, allowing us to apply that strength to other activities. The most obvious difference between listening to music and playing it is that the latter requires fine motor skills, which are controlled in both hemispheres of the brain. It also combines the linguistic and mathematical precision in which the left hemisphere is more involved, with the novel and creative content that the right excels in. For these reasons, playing music has been found to increase the volume and activity in the brain's corpus callosum, the bridge between the two hemispheres, allowing messages to get across the brain faster and through more diverse routes. This may allow musicians to solve problems more effectively and creatively in both academic and social settings. Because making music also involves crafting and understanding its emotional content and message, musicians often have higher levels of executive function, a category of interlinked tasks that includes planning, strategizing, and attention to detail, and requires simultaneous analysis of both cognitive and emotional aspects. This ability also has an impact on how our memory systems work. And indeed, musicians exhibit enhanced memory functions, creating, storing, and retrieving memories more quickly and efficiently. Studies have found that musicians appear to use their highly connected brains to give each memory multiple tags, such as a conceptual tag, an emotional tag, an audio tag, and a contextual tag, like a good internet search engine. So how do we know that all these benefits are unique to music as opposed to, say, sports or painting? Or could it be that people who go into music were already smarter to begin with? Neuroscientists have explored these issues, but so far they have found that the artistic and aesthetic aspects of learning to play a musical instrument are different from any other activity studied, including other arts. And several randomized studies of participants who showed the same levels of cognitive function and neural processing at the start found that those who were exposed to a period of music learning showed enhancement in multiple brain areas compared to the others. This recent research about the mental benefits of playing music has advanced our understanding of mental function, revealing the inner rhythms and complex interplay that make up the amazing orchestra of our brain.
Thank you. Next slide. This is my group performing in 2013, the last tour we did. This is Interlaken, Switzerland. And we were one of two American groups invited to perform at that. There were two Japanese groups. There were several European groups. And anyway, it was the end of my career at the University of Nebraska Omaha. We can skip the next slide and go to the next one. So this was a research that looked at the use of music to support academic skills, and there was significant gains from the instrumental musicians as well. Next one. That's the correct one. This was a study with young children, and they compared that music study with linguistic study, and the musicians were always stronger than the non-musicians. Next one. And this was alluded to in the video we just watched, but the highly trained instrumental musicians, their brain is actually larger and thicker than the average person. Next one. This was another study that compared professional musicians and it's found that their corpus, the front of the corpus callosum is much bigger than the other person. And I added the next slide because, oh, I turned the page too soon. That's again what they were talking about. The connectivity with instrumental musicians is much more effective and much stronger. And you probably all know this guy at the bottom here, Albert Einstein. He was a violinist, and he said at one point, if he had not been a scientist, he would have been a violinist. Now the next slide. Let's see, that's more of the same thing that we were talking about just a minute ago. Next one. There's the one. I wanted to get your attention here. So what does music have to do with sex? Well, what it does is it releases dopamine in the brain when you're performing, just like in sexual activity. And I think this is interesting. Why musicians study music? It has no survival skill. But it is so significant among human beings. Next one. So these are brain scans of young musicians. And so the top one you see is after a short period of time of studying music. I think it was 1.5 years. And the bottom is whether their brains look like before they studied music. So we also know that music enhances language and reading as well. And part of it is because music is studied the same way that we read books. It goes from left to right and up and down. Next one. And this is comparing instrumental music with math and academics in general. And you can see the results of the studies there. Next one. And I have seen this personally with my students as they got stronger as musicians. And I was a high school band director for 10 years before I went to do my Ph.D. The students in my bands, as they matured, they got much more self-confident and their image of themselves was much better. I had my last high school teaching job was 1970 to 78. And I have had so many students over the years from even those high school days talk to me about that this was the most important thing they did when they were in high school. I hear from my students from my first teaching job in 1967 all the time. Next one. So it is valuable and important, regardless of your age, to continue to study and make it. Somebody was talking earlier that they sing all the time, and they've been doing this since middle school. We have in Sun City, we have a chorus. We have several small instrumental groups that meet all the time. And so at any age, it's not too late to start. Next one. So this is another study. Nina Kraus is the researcher, and she has done many research studies involving the development of the brain and with different students involved. Next one. Now, someone I was talking with recently, maybe it was Leanna, said something about her mother being in assisted care. The research that has been done, do you know that almost all hospitals have a music therapist employed in the hospital? Because one of the things they have found is that hearing loss can be obtained or treated somewhat with music. But the most important thing that's been done is they know that people with dementia or Alzheimer's, the music skill and knowledge does not deteriorate nearly as fast as the other skills. I have a softball player, a friend, that I gave this presentation at Lifelong Learning several years ago, and he came up to me and he said, my mom is has Alzheimer's, and she doesn't respond to anything anymore. And so I suggested to him he get a musical device with earpods in it, and to record some of the music she listened to. He took the machine with him to the next time he went to see his mother. He put the iPod or the earpods in her ears, and he turned on the music, and she looked at him and started to smile. She could listen to the music, and as far as I know, he's still doing that. Next one. So this is more about the dementia, Alzheimer's too. Next one. So I'm going to try to run past some of the things that I've talked about, but also some others as well. Do you know that the music majors are the most admitted to medical schools? Not math, not biology, not English. One of my good friends, he was the band director at big school in Tennessee, Nashville. Anyway, she was in charge of admitting students to the medical school. And she noticed that almost every student that she interviewed had played in the band or played in the orchestra or something. Next one. This is another study related to music, but it's really important. Knowing how is more important than knowing, period. So those students that are taught by rote, they may end up being a strong singer or a strong musician, but if they know how, there's much more growth in their study. Next one. Music was long thought to be processed in the right side of the brain. Actually, most vocal music is done that way because many vocal musicians do not read music. They're trained by rote. And so every study that has been done looking about music in the brain has involved instrumental musicians. Now, here's something that I recently, a study that I recently ran across, and it was very meaningful to me because when I became the department head, I stopped practicing my trumpet for a couple of hours a day because I just didn't have a couple of hours a day to do that. But what they have found out is that the conductors, when they're studying their scores, their brain is doing the same thing that my brain did when I was practicing the trumpet. So even studying the scores where you're not listening to anything, you're just studying and you're not performing anything, it still has the same result in the brain. Next one. So what you're seeing here on the photo on the color is what it looks like, the brain looks like when an instrumental musician is playing their instrument. And by the way, there's no difference between piano or percussion or trombone or violin or anything else. The brain is still reacting the same way. Next one. And there's really strong evidence, and this is being studied really right now, that the transfer of music study and all over study is really strong. Next one. So the earlier instrumental study is begun, and that usually is about the age of 6, because by the time their children are 6 years, that they can hold more than one idea in their brain at the same time. So it's Suzuki is important because it puts the mother with the Suzuki children, and they learn motor activity, but the real brain activity, they have to be about 6 years old to do that. But the longer that they study, and it provides a lifetime of benefits. And by the way, this never goes away. Even if you stop playing the piano at 9 years age, what happens in the brain in that time does not deteriorate. Next one. And recent research has been focused on whether the musicians were much more talented or innately. And what they found is that perseverance, focus of effort, intensity, and time also are more important factors. So these are the facts. When you play an instrument, your performance requires processing by every lobe in the brain. Music is not a right-brained activity. It is a whole-brained activity. And we know that great musicians are more effective in using their brains as a result of their efforts to become great musicians. Music is in your head, changing your brain at any age. And that's it. Thank you.
Dr. Shaker, I am predicting we may have to have an encore performance from you because I have a feeling all of this is going to stimulate different thoughts. You know, I just, I'm kind of gauging from some of the comments that I think we might be able to put together some avenues of thought that if you would entertain us by maybe addressing those thoughts, we'll get them to you, and would love to have you come back.
Okay.
Because I can think of a couple million things right now that, if we had another hour, I think we would still be here, because all of us are wanting to, make the most of our lives. John just wrote in the chat that June had to leave, but her first love is handbells in a church group, coaching young people. I think whether it's church, whether it's school or whatever, I just totally agree. Those, exposing children at a young age to music is just so critical. Let me go to Dr. Shaker. I do want you to stick around, so stay here just a second.
Okay.
At the end of our meetings, we like to do a presentation of a children's book that will go into a little free library, and it will have a placard. This one will talk about the Rotary E-Club recognizing you for your dedication to music's positive power in all aspects of our lives, and you've done that all of your life. I have a lot of fun picking out these books, and this one in particular, if you'll notice the author, Dan Brown.
Yes.
That is the Dan Brown who wrote the Da Vinci Code, and who.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And get this, I did not know this, and these are his words. It's a note from the author, and this is from Dan Brown. My parents were both musicians and teachers, and I grew up practicing classical piano, singing in choirs, and attending lots, with emphasis, of concerts. Music was a special sanctuary for me as a child. It calmed me when I felt frustrated, was a trusted friend when I felt lonely, helped me express my joy when I was happy, and best of all, sparked my creativity and imagination. Music is kind of storytelling, and the orchestral movements in Wild Symphony, combined with their accompanying poems and illustrations, all work together like a code of sorts to tell a story and reveal a funny or interesting side of an animal's personality. So this book actually has an interactive, like QR codes that the adult can, engage the child in. But my biggest takeaway from that, and knowing, having read that this morning when I chose this book, was that what Dan Brown said about his background as a child, underscores so much of what you talked about tonight. And this is a best-selling author who started out as a child of musicians and started out in music himself. And I think from that, we can say that's no accident, thanks to listening to you tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Shaker. This has just been an amazing evening. And I'm really serious about that encore performance. I think, so be watching your email.
Okay.
All right. But thank you very much.
And thank you all for being such a good audience for me too.
Great. Thank you, sir. Well,